Hello, and welcome to another brand new episode of the MEN1 Mosaic podcast. Today, I have with me Simon, who is an NCUK ambassador and also a patient advocate for MEN1. And I've been so excited to invite him on to share about his journey, some of the wisdoms he's picked up along the way, and to be helping you with wherever you are in your journey too. So, hi, Simon. It is such a pleasure to have you on. And I'm going to jump in with my first question, which is, in a nutshell, who are you and what has been your journey so far, or your experience so far with the MEN1 condition or health generally?
Hi, Lizzie. Thanks for having me. My journey started back in 2012 with MEN type 1. And irony of irony, I didn't actually have any health issues at the time at all. So as we all know, MEN type 1 is a genetic disease, and that does run obviously through our family. So the way I was made aware of MEN type 1 was through genetic counselling with a family member at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham. So I went for the genetics counselling as I knew the disease was in the family, and then underwent the genetics testing and tested positive for MEN type 1. As I wasn't displaying any health issues at the time, I was on annual surveillance, simply of blood and urine, I think, like most of us probably were or have experienced or still experiencing, etc. Unfortunately, years later, my health did start to then deteriorate. So first of all, with high calcium. So I went and had a partial parathyroidectomy, which again is probably quite common, it was partial because of my age at the time. So quite like the surgeon telling me I was quite young, so he only wanted to take 2 out, which was fantastic, and leave the other 2 in. And again, then I kind of went for a number of years of being okay, really. But heading towards 2018, my health took a really big turn. I was being very ill, lots of sickness and diarrhea, like we probably all experienced. And I like to describe it as I hit the big red panic button and got in touch with my team at the QE. And then I had an EUS with an ultrasound, and unfortunately, 2 endocrine tumours were well, 2 tumours in my pancreas, and that's where we went from then. Running alongside that, being so ill, with a career in teaching, at that point I was off work and underwent or was seen by occupational health, and I was actually medically retired from teaching about 5 years ago, because there were no sort of reasonable adjustments deemed to be made for me for work. So that kind of brings us up to the current day, where I'm now a stay-at-home dad and get to run our family home.
It sounds blissful. I'm going to say that the latter half of that, in terms of being able to stay at home and be a dad, that's amazing. The first half is less incredible, but I'm sure you're going to give us a little bit more insight into that, and maybe how that and your approach to it has helped you bring you to where you are now. One of the things I wanted to talk about, and this is partly because I'm also a writer as well, so if ever I get to read other people's writing, it just fills me up from within. You have written a couple of pieces actually for Neuroendocrine Cancer UK, which is the charity you are an ambassador for. One of them being called That Fraudulent Feeling. What is that fraudulent feeling for someone who, probably knows what this is, but maybe hasn't had the chance to verbalize it to anyone or can't quite find the words for it?
Yeah, I mean, the fraudulent feeling, I was talking to other patients and then was asked to kind of write an article called that, because I feel if I am stood in a crowd, no one knows. The people I don't know, if you look at me, there isn't a kind of an invisible banner above my head that says, this is what I've got, these are my issues, no one can see it. And on some days I can have really, really good days and be normal. but on other days I can be horrifically ill. So that fraudulent feeling, I suppose, is both a physical and a mental sort of state. It can play on both, because some days your body might be okay, or it certainly looks okay, and the same with your own mental well-being as well, really.
Absolutely. And I very much relate to what you said about no one really knows from the outside what's going on. As you say, none of us wears a sandwich board or a banner above our head that says, I have MEN1 or I am a neuroendocrine cancer patient, whatever it might be. What do you think this journey so far, with MEN1 and obviously the way it's manifested for you, which has been the hyperparathyroidism, the neuroendocrine tumors, and subsequently everything you've been through sort of as a result. If you could write that sandwich board, what would you write on it? What is it that you feel people should or ought to know, or you want them to know?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm quite an open book, so when people find out my health issues, I am very open about it. So I can disclose all. I don't have an issue with that. And I, again, coming from my teaching background, kind of use it as an educational tool to make people aware that, and it goes to the kind of disability saying, really, that not all disabilities are visual. You can't see them. And I think as, the MEN type 1 community, we most definitely probably fall into that. I think it's part of the culture of who I am, is that kind of educating, talking to people, listening, and helping them along with their journey. I certainly feel that MEN type 1 and the neuroendocrine tumors is definitely, I describe it as a marathon, not a sprint. And you need to have plenty of resilience, really, to get through a marathon, and to keep yourself going. So that would be key on my sandwich board, really.
I think that's a really interesting thing you've just said. And the word resilience stuck out to me. And you'll know this because I mentioned this in my free workshop session the other day. Resilience, I know from my experience anyway, I mistook resilience for wanting to do everything by myself, not wanting to ask for help, not wanting to let people really see what was going on. And I think underneath that was a feeling as though somehow MEN1 made me weak, or it was embarrassing, or I didn't want the attention on me. I absolutely hated attention for something over which I actually felt people were giving me their pity. What would you say to someone? And I've worked on myself. I've grown through that, but it still comes up, every now and again. What would you say to patients who have that thing inside of them that's like, I better just keep this to myself, or, let's keep it on a need to know basis, given you've, just spoken about you're an open book, and you feel as though helping patients, self-advocate and raise awareness. What would you say to people who maybe don't feel that comes naturally to them, or particularly easily?
Yeah, I imagine for some that's very difficult to do, to share their own thoughts or feelings, or they might be embarrassed, any other feelings they might have. But my personal experience is when people do know, you might go through that journey of, do they feel sorry for me or pity, etc. But actually, generally, most people have your best interests at heart, particularly those people who are close to you. And then if you're if you're at work still, your employer has a legal obligation then to also help you, and that's a place and an issue. Maybe when I was still employed, I wasn't very good at talking to my employer, certainly to say, actually, I probably need I don't need a lot of adjustments, but I certainly need some. I would personally encourage people to come forward and say, just making you aware, this is the situation. people can go away and do their own research online if you don't want to go into a lot of detail. But I have found more times than not that the people around you then can help and support, and that's something we'd probably do for a friend or a colleague or a family member anyway. But it's even more, I described it as a marathon. When you're running a marathon, or as we are, I think that's even more important to have that help and support network there.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I would love to circle back for a moment on what you just said about, going into the workplace or going to your employer and, asking for perhaps parameters to be put in place or certain adjustments to be made, to cater for the position you're in. I cannot tell you the number of people who come to me and they say, I cannot get leave from work. I'm having to take holiday in order to go to my appointments. My boss is a nightmare. My colleagues don't get it. I don't know if that's necessarily the experience you've had personally, or if you know people who have, but what would be your suggestion or your advice, if we can call it that, for someone in that sort of position?
Yeah, that's certainly if you've got an employer who isn't being supportive, that's going to potentially be difficult for you, particularly if you're under annual or 6 monthly surveillance, you're going to be going to those appointments anyway. If you go through a period of bad health and you're having time off or having to go to more appointments for tests or results, etc., again, that's going to be difficult. Employers do have a legal obligation to allow you to go to those. In my profession, teaching, I was a member of a teachers' union. I didn't have to ever involve my teachers' union. I'm a bit of a believer in give and take. So if you do have those appointments, then it is an open and frank conversation with the employer about, well, I've got to go for this. There sort of isn't any two ways about it. But how can I, work with you to facilitate that? What can be done? We do, after COVID as well, the working from, if you have got the working from home capacity as well and capabilities, then that should also ease that situation. But some of the centres of excellence can be a long way away, and it's not just like nipping to a GP for a short 10-minute consultation. You probably are out for the day, and that's, again, it's that sort of transparency, and we might not want to air all our dirty linen in public, but your employer also, it's a bit like a family member. They have a responsibility for you and to help you. So again, I would encourage people to be open, honest and frank, but I'm not naive enough to sit here and say that there are, maybe all employers are have your best interest at heart, shall we say.
Thank you very much for explaining that. And I appreciate, the kind of the perspective and the perception you've taken there, which is, this is what I've done and this is what's worked for me. This is what you could do. But equally, it so depends on your circumstances. And I think, that is what is so important to remember, that, we can have a handbook. Someone could give us a handbook or a rule book, but that, that isn't necessarily going to work depending on, our situation, our circumstances. And so one of the things I massively advocate for or ask patients to think about is, who they've got around them. I call it building your A team. Who are your healthcare professionals? In what environment are you working? Who are your family? Who are your friends? Who are supporting you? You mentioned centres of excellence, and actually I'm going to come back to that right at the end of the episode for some member questions. But I just wanted to kind of come back again to that fraudulent feeling point, which we mentioned back at the beginning, and is what your article is based over. And by the way, to anyone listening, I'm going to include the article link in the description box underneath this email, so you can have a read. It's absolutely fantastic. The other very, very common thing I hear in MEN1 or in patient experience generally is, I feel like a total fraud. I feel like an imposter because I do not feel like I can somehow ask. I don't feel like I can stand up for myself. I mean, you're at a stage now, where you're you know, a fair few years into your diagnosis, you seem to be in a pretty, from what I understand, kind of stable place, both in your personal life and in your, you know, your health as well. And I know you have an amazing healthcare team around you. Do you ever have those feelings still pop up of, you know, I'm a fraud and I don't get what I'm doing here and I need to step back and I need to let, you know, the people who know what they're doing do their thing. I just need to kind of sit back and watch. Does that ever come up still?
A little. So when I was first diagnosed, obviously there's a lot of new terminology and tests and trips to the hospital, and I had a blue ring binder folder, and I kept all the test results, all letters, even the invites to appointments in there in date order. And it did become a bit of a joke, a nice joke, that when I went to appointments with my team and when I was attending the natters with neuroendocrine, that blue folder always went with me, because I kind of felt all the a bit like a safety blanket, I suppose, as well. But all the answers were sort of in there. Over time, I have managed to relax, and sort of I do still maintain that file and folder, but nowhere near to the depths that I did. I have an awful lot of trust in the team around me. The endocrinologists at the QE, you know, they've been absolutely fantastic. And again, that can come down to patient experience. Because of my own circumstances being quite stable, I am on a 12-month, even with the two peanuts, I am on 12-month review. So that's quite a way, you know, compared to 3 or 6 months. So I almost can put it to the back of my mind, even though, you know, we're in that cycle of taking daily medication every 28 days and then scans, but I can kind of put that to a side, and I am able to go out and have a good time and do some things, but I have to be very careful and manage myself. So if I know I'm going to go and do something, I need to make sure that there's some time either side of that event where I don't let fatigue kick in and things. But kind of closing the circle on that, again, I have the secretary's email address at the QE, so I know if I can raise and if there's anything of concern, I will. And hopefully, I've got a relationship with the team that they know I only contact them when there's something that I really need to contact. You know, so that's that. And I was quite lucky with my GP team as well, but unfortunately my GP's changed, that I also had that relationship with them as well. It's quite nice sometimes being a little bit rare. You know, people sit up and tend to listen, and it's something new, and it's not the cold at the GP. And I did have that kind of relationship, and I could almost see my GP's eyes kind of widen a little bit. But that's slightly different relationship now. But that's sort of where I am in the process, and I've kind of after 12 years, I'm a little bit, well, I am quite relaxed now compared to certainly when I was at the start of the process.
It's phenomenal to hear. It's phenomenal to hear. I'm so chuffed, and I really hope that you know, your experience shows patients what it can be like. You know, that there is a possibility outside of the stress and the frustration and so much of those natural emotions which come along, particularly earlier on in the diagnosis. So it's really phenomenal what you've shared, and brings me on to my final question, in a manner of speaking. If you could give one piece of advice to someone who's going through what you've been through, or perhaps back to a past version of yourself who didn't know what you know now, what would you say to them? What would that piece of advice be?
Yeah, I've mentioned it once or twice already, and I'm going to mention it again. It is a marathon. We are running. Our bodies are running a marathon, and don't fight it. You've got to go. You're on the journey. If you put your energy into fighting yourself or fighting what is happening to you, granted we don't like it, but just keep running that marathon. Be resilient. Break it down into your daily routine. If you're on the land side or similar, the 28-day, then your checkups. It's not enjoyable, but find a process through that and just try and hit your stride and take it day by day, and just be resilient and just keep going. and it'll be what it'll be. Unfortunately, it will be what it'll be. There will be bad days, but you just make sure the better days are outweigh the bad days.
That's amazing. Thank you for that piece of wisdom. I think that's going to land hugely. I'm going to move on now to some questions that have been sent in by our members. And the first one is, I loved this when I read it. How are you so stable? How have you got to this place in your MEN1 experience when, let's say, if we look out into the community, most of what we see is not what you have? How have you got here?